What's going on, guys? It's Buddy here, and today I'm going to show you guys how to turn this ugly floor into this beautiful floating laminate floor here. And a quick side note, this client said they want the job done as fast as possible, so we did not remove any of the molding, we just put some quarter round down here. Since putting quarter round down is substantially faster than removing all of the baseboard and then putting new baseboard or the existing baseboard back on, that's the route that the client decided to go with. Quarter round installation is going to be in a different video. I'm going to put a link in the description so you can go ahead and check it out. It should be a real quick video for you guys. So let's jump right into the video. And in case you guys don't know what quarter round is, quarter round is just a quarter of a circle. Essentially what it does is it covers up any flooring job that is to the baseboard, not with the baseboard removing to cover up the gap. Quarter round is actually what's used to cover up the gap here and give you a nice clean finish. And what we're going to be using today is laminate flooring. This is going to be a floating floor. There's not going to be any glue or any adhesive holding it to the floor. So the first course of action is to remove this carpet and get the floor nice and smooth to get ready for the laminate. Now all you guys are going to need to remove the carpet is just a utility knife with a sharp blade. Now on this commercial property you can see the carpet is very thin. Residential houses usually have a thicker carpet and something called tack strips on the edges of where the carpet gets held down. So you may need a crowbar to actually pull those up. Now what's being used here is something called a razor edge scraper. You're going to need this to smooth out the floor. Now the commercial carpet is held down by an adhesive, so it's definitely necessary in this case. Now on residential houses, the underlayment of the carpet actually has an adhesive holding it down as well, so you definitely want to make sure that you do have something to scrape it out to get it nice and smooth here for your laminate. And I definitely do recommend these razor edge scrapers. They are replaceable razor heads on them, so you can use them over and over again. I'll be sure to throw a link in the description for one on Amazon, also with some refill blades for you guys. Now obviously you want to make sure that you sweep up all of the dust that you're going to make from scraping up the floor. You want to make sure there's no dust or no specks on the ground. They're going to mess up your flooring job. So now that the floor is prepped, it's time to install our underlayment. Now the underlayment is definitely important. What it does is actually creates a moisture barrier between the concrete floor and the actual wood. Laying it down is actually going to be pretty straightforward. It doesn't need to be perfectly flat because the laminate is actually going to push it down. Now as you see here as I bring it in, it does have this tape, and what this tape is used for is actually overlap them and they're going to stick together. So we're going to pull it back, pull that clear plastic over the other piece next to it, and then they'll stick together perfectly. Now this stuff comes at a bunch of different price points. This one I'm using here is about $30 per 100 square foot. Some more premium ones go all the way up to about $55 per 100 square feet. There's not a huge difference in the actual quality or what they do. They just make it a little more soundproof, so when you step on them, it's going to be a little more quiet. It's going to feel more like hardwood floor. And I'm always going to recommend, when you do cut them to the wall, give them about an inch overlapping the wall. You can always cut them after you lay down the laminate floor. You don't want to short yourself here. You can always cut more, but you can never add it back on once you cut it. And as you can see here, what I'm doing is I'm lining up my second piece here with the first piece that we put. I'm going to get the plastic right over the underlayment on the first one. You're going to pull back your tape and you're just going to press it down with your other hand. And it's a pretty straightforward process. It doesn't need to be perfect. They can overlap slightly. This is very thin material. But what you're going to want to do is get them as close as you possibly can. And you don't really have to worry about being perfectionist here. So now that our underlayment is all laid down, it's time to move on to the next step, and that's actually starting your laminate flooring. And a quick note here, you can see it doesn't lay down perfectly flat. That's no problem at all. Like I said earlier in the video, it doesn't need to be perfectly flat. It'll lay down flat once the laminate's on top of it. So how I'm going to start is in this corner of the room. I do want to make sure that the thicker pieces are here by the door where they're going to be seen. I don't really care if the cut pieces here are at the end of the wall. So how the laminate floor actually connects to one another is through a system called tongue and groove. You can see on this side it has a lip, that's called the tongue, and on the other side here is called the groove. Now installation of them is pretty simple. All you're going to need is a rubber mallet. You're going to slide it in at a 45-degree angle roughly, and you're going to push it until it's butted up with the other one. The tongue is going to slide inside the groove, and you're going to line it up here on the left side, and then with your rubber mallet you're going to hammer it down where all the connecting joints are. So what I'm going to be using to cut my boards is something called a miter saw. A miter saw is going to make sure we get a nice clean cut, and it's also going to ensure that the cuts we're doing are going to be perfectly straight. We want to make sure they are straight. If they're not, it won't line up and your flooring job will look like crap. Now I'm starting here by cutting this board by 1/3. So essentially if it's 30 inches long, I'm cutting it 10 inches. And why I'm doing that here is to make sure that the lines we have are going to be staggered. And what I mean by staggered is that the joints where each board touches each other is not going to be exactly the same. It's going to have a nice natural look. So you can see as I put the first board down here, this is about 2/3 of one board. I'm going to grab the second board, and the second board is going to be a full-size board. You see they don't line up perfectly on each side. And then the third board of what I'm going to be grabbing is going to be the shortest board. Now I like to do it this way. That way it's a third offset. But you can also do a half a board, a whole board, half a board, whole board. That's going to give it a different look. I personally like the 3, but you can do it whichever way you want. So what I'm doing here at this point is I'm taking a board and I'm cutting about 2 to 3 inch little pieces. What these are going to be used for is spacers. The spacers are going to go in between the wall and in between your flooring job, and those are going to actually account for moisture and different humidity changes, because the floor will swell up slightly. You want to make sure it's not completely butted to the wall. That way it has a little room for expansion so it doesn't buckle. And as you can see here, this is what I mean between the flooring and the wall. I won't be using the rest of the video. I've been doing this long enough, but I definitely recommend for beginners you stick with the spacers. Now when you're doing any flooring job, whether it's tiling or laminate floor in this case, what you're going to need is something called an oscillating tool. There is a way to cut the door jamb without an oscillating tool. It's a lot harder. I definitely recommend that you buy one. They're not very expensive. The one I'm using is fairly expensive. But what I'll do here for you guys, I'm going to put a link of a good cheap one in the description you can get on Amazon. It should last you a good while as long as you're not using it every day like I am. So once you got your door jamb cut, your flooring will slide right under the door jamb nice and pretty. And what I'm doing here is I'm actually marking this corner out. I'm going to cut this corner out. That way I can push it up against the door threshold, which is right under the door, and give it a nice clean look. And this is also another reason why I'm going to recommend an oscillating tool. They're super handy in precision work like this. What I'm doing is I'm cutting out the corner of this board right now with the oscillating tool. It makes real quick work out of this wood, and it's also super precise, so you'll be able to get a nice clean finish. Now what I recommend is always cut your door jambs before you even start laying down your flooring. What I'm going to do is put a little piece down just to make sure I give the right gap for my door jamb. I'm take my oscillating tool, lay it right on top of the flooring, and cut out all the door jambs in the room that I'm going to be working on. And you can see here as I lay down this board, it does fit nice and snug right under the door jamb, so it fits nice against the wall and it fits nice against the actual door threshold. The threshold is just what's under the door. That's what that's called. So we're going to take this. I threw the mallet over and she's going to smack it over to me, and then I'm going to hammer it in. And once that's down, I'm going to take the next piece and I'm going to take my mallet and I'm going to hammer it in place. So now when we get to the wall, we got our first cut piece. Looks like it's about 3 inches, so I'm going to measure 3 inches from the wall. Take my pencil, mark at my 3-inch mark, and I'm actually going to count for a little bit more going under the threshold, because remember it can go under the threshold a little bit. So I'm going to mark that out at about 4 inches coming off the wall, and then I'm going to give it about another 1/2 inch or so, it looks like here. That way it can slide right under the threshold of the door, and I'm going to show you guys how to make the mark here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my little piece of board, I'm going to mark that. That's the part that's going under the door jamb. And then this part here that I'm about to mark out is the part that's actually to go right to the wall. So I'm going to take my piece here and cut it with the miter saw first. Make sure it's a nice straight line. Now I don't really recommend that you hold it in your hand while you cut it. Maybe you can prop it up on something. But me, I'm not really worried. So this is another good example of why an oscillating tool is so important and so handy. What I'm doing here is I'm going to cut out this little notch that I marked out here with the square. And I know this might seem pretty intimidating looking at me measuring, cutting, measuring, and cutting. As long as you look at it and you know kind of what needs to happen, if you stare at it long enough, you're going to be able to figure it out. So don't get too intimidated by all this. And it looks like it fits beautifully in there. Don't worry, this is going to be the hardest part of the entire job. Once you're done with this part, it's all smooth sailing from there. And then we're going to get our next long piece hammered in place. And then once we get to the wall, we're going to slide it under the door, mark it with our finger or with a pencil we need to cut, and then we're going to go make our cut. And if you're finding this video helpful, I would really appreciate if you push the little thumbs up button at the bottom of the video. I appreciate it, guys. Now at this point, all the hard work is done. You pretty much just hammer in the boards and make your cuts when you get to the wall. Now be sure to use the spacers like I showed you in the beginning. It's very important that you make sure the wood has enough room to expand slightly. You also don't want the gap to be too big between the wall and the laminate. You should have a piece of quarter round or baseboard as you go around and make sure that it's going to fill the gap between the wall and the laminate. And also be sure to use a mallet while installing the laminate. Don't use a metal hammer. You're actually going to ruin it. You're going to mark it up. It's going to look horrible. I'm actually going to put a link in the description to every tool I've used on this job. It's going to be an Amazon link. And I know I said this before, but I highly recommend the oscillating tool. Not only are they good for this flooring job, but also drywall patch jobs, or just cutting a little piece of wood on your desk at home, or in pretty much just about anything. I probably use mine about 50 times this year. I'm going to put a link to one I have in the description. It's lasted me about 7 years of abuse. I'm also going to put a cheaper one in case you guys were on a budget, but it's definitely still decent quality. And if I left any bits of information out, be sure to leave a comment and I'll get back to you with an answer. So we're going to get the last part of this flooring job and we're going to wrap everything up. Alright guys, and something that pretty awesome happened. This probably, actually, it definitely won't happen to you. This has happened to me maybe twice in 100 jobs. But this last piece here fits perfectly. Just small enough gap here that I can put a quarter round and cover it up. So here on the end of the wall, we do have a little bit of a gap. That's as expected. Nothing's ever going to be perfect. So I measured here. It looks like an inch is going to cover everything and give us enough room so the quarter round can cover the rest. So how we're going to pull an inch, long ways of course, is we're going to mark 1 inch here, all the way down, mark another one at 1 inch. We're going to take another piece of board or a level or a chalk line, whatever you got. So we're going to line it up and then draw down our 1 inch board. Now also a side note, be sure to give it another 1/8 of an inch because you do have this lip that will slide under the board here. An important note here, if you do have a small crowbar, you can use it to pull these end pieces in nice and tight. And be sure to smash the thumbs up button as always. I got a couple videos on the screen. It's all geared towards beginners, so anybody's going to be able to do them. So definitely check out my channel and definitely consider subscribing.